guys, we are starting a new chapter, so let's go.
Have you ever stopped to think about how we, as a species, even attempt to write a rule book for an entire planet? It sounds impossible, right? But from the air we all breathe to the phone in your hand, there's this huge, mostly invisible system of laws and agreements that's trying to do just that. So today, let's dive in. We're going to peel back the layers on this system, from the highest levels of global diplomacy right down to the nitty-gritty of who's responsible when things go wrong.
And this quote from Rachel Carson, man, it really gets to the heart of everything we're talking about. It's the core idea, the big aha moment. Protecting the environment isn't just about saving polar bears or rainforests, it's about saving ourselves. And that single realization is the engine that has fueled decades of work trying to build a global rulebook for our own survival.
So, where do you even start with something so massive? Well, it begins on the global stage. You can think of it like a giant green handshake. This is where countries have to come together because they realize that huge problems like a thinning ozone layer or a warming climate, they don't care about our borders. They're shared problems, and the only way to fix them is to work together.
Okay, now the language here can get a little formal, a little jargony, but the idea is actually super simple. Let's stick with this house building analogy. A convention, that's when all the countries get together in one big room and say, okay, we all agree we need to build a house to protect the environment. It's the big picture agreement. A protocol, on the other hand, is the actual blueprint. It's got the details, the dimensions, the specific, legally binding rules for how we're going to build that house. One is the what, the other is the how.
And this hasn't happened overnight. This has been a 50-year process, really. It kicked off in a big way back in '72 at the Stockholm Conference. That was the first of its kind. Then you get game changers like the Montreal Protocol in '87, a huge win that actually helped fix the hole in the ozone layer. Then the Rio Earth Summit in '92 was massive. It laid the groundwork for how we talk about climate change and biodiversity even today. You can see how each step, from Kyoto to Paris, is like a stepping stone, building on what came before to create this slow, evolving, global understanding.
But let's be real. Global handshakes and international treaties can feel pretty distant, can't they? Sometimes the most powerful and effective rules aren't made in fancy conference halls. They're forged in the aftermath of a disaster. And to really understand why national laws matter so much, we have to go back to one of the absolute darkest moments in industrial history.
On the night of December 2nd, 1984, in Bhopal, India, a pesticide plant released a massive cloud of toxic gas over a sleeping city. This picture, it doesn't even begin to capture the scale of the horror. Bhopal was more than a tragedy, it was a wake-up call. It was a catastrophe that showed the world the deadly gaps in our rulebooks and forced an entire country to rethink everything.
So how did this happen? Well, the terrifying part is that it wasn't just one single thing that went wrong. It was a complete domino effect. A chemical reaction started, sure, but every single safety system that should have stopped it, every single one, was either broken or had been turned off. We're talking refrigeration systems, scrubbers, alarms, all of it. A total systematic failure, and it was all driven by cutting costs.
And the human cost, it's just staggering. Let this number sink in for a second. More than 500,000 people were exposed to that toxic gas. The official numbers list thousands dead, but many estimates put the real number above 15,000. And that doesn't even count the hundreds of thousands who were left with lifelong health problems. The scale of it is almost impossible to wrap your head around. Out of this horror, something had to change. And it did. India passed the Environment Protection Act just 2 years later, in 1986. Now, what's really important here is that it's known as an umbrella act. Think of it like a giant umbrella that was designed to cover all the holes and gaps that existed in the older, weaker laws. It gave the central government real teeth to make sure something like Bhopal could never, ever happen again. Okay, so having laws that react to disasters is absolutely essential. But what's the real goal? The real goal is prevention. It's about stopping the disaster before it can even start. And that brings us to the tools we use to look into the future to figure out the risks of a project before anyone even breaks ground.
Man, that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? How do we get ahead of the problem? How do you move from just cleaning up messes to actually preventing them from being made in the first place? Well, the main tool we've come up with is a process called an Environmental Impact Assessment, or EIA for short.
An EIA is basically a mandatory safety check for any big new project. It's a series of logical steps. First, you do a quick check. Is this project big enough to even need a full assessment? That's screening. If yes, then you figure out what the main concerns are. That's scoping. You gather data, you analyze the potential problems, and then, and this is the most important part, you have to come up with ways to reduce those risks.
All of that gets put into a big report, which officials review before they say yes or no. And even if they say yes, they keep an eye on things to make sure the project sticks to the plan.
And this isn't just some textbook theory. It happens in the real world all the time. Take two massive projects in India. For Mumbai's huge coastal road, the EIA flagged major risks to marine life, so the project got approved, but with conditions. They had to transplant mangroves and constantly monitor the water. Or look at the world's largest renewable energy park. The EIA found risks to desert wildlife. The fix? They had to build buffer zones and use waterless robots to clean the solar panels. See, it's not just a yes or no, it's a negotiation to find the safest way forward.
All right, so we've covered global pacts, national laws, and project-level safety checks. We've gone from the 30,000-foot view right down to the ground. But what's the one core principle that powers this whole system? What's the fundamental idea that makes it all work? Well, it all boils down to one simple, crucial question. When there's an environmental mess, who pays the bill?
The answer is a powerful idea called the polluter pays principle. And honestly, it's as simple as it sounds. If you make the mess, you have to pay to clean it up. This principle is what puts teeth into all those laws and treaties. It means that environmental damage isn't some abstract problem that society has to deal with later. Nope. It becomes a real cost, a line item on a company's balance sheet. It makes pollution part of the cost of doing business.
Now, in recent decades, that idea has evolved into something even smarter: extended producer responsibility, or EPR. This takes the polluter pays idea a giant step further. It basically says that a company's responsibility doesn't end when you buy their product. They're on the hook for the product's entire life, including what happens to it after you're done with it. The collection, the recycling, the disposal, the whole shebang.
And this diagram shows it perfectly. For centuries, we've had this straight line: take, make, waste. A product gets made, used, and then thrown in a landfill. EPR's goal is to bend that line into a circle. The company that makes the product is also responsible for getting it back and figuring out how to reuse or recycle it. And the genius of that is it forces them to think about waste from the very beginning, back in the design phase.
And again, this is happening right now. It's not just a cool idea. In India, for example, EPR is the main strategy for dealing with our most challenging kinds of waste. We're talking plastic, e-waste from all our gadgets, batteries. The rules now make the producers of this stuff legally and financially responsible for it, shifting the burden from you and me back to the source.
So, from a global handshake in Stockholm half a century ago to a company figuring out how to recycle a battery in Mumbai today, we've pieced together this incredibly complex, multi-layered rulebook. The architecture is there, the ideas are there, but it leaves us with one final and maybe the most important question. Is a rulebook, no matter how clever or well-written, ever really enough?